What happens when a fake physicist with a made-up theory meets a real scientist who actually knows what he's talking about? You're about to witness one of the most brutal intellectual beatdowns in recent memory. Eric Weinstein, the self-proclaimed genius who thinks he's revolutionized physics, just got absolutely demolished by Sean Carroll, an actual working physicist. We're going to break down every single moment where Weinstein's house of cards comes crashing down, expose his manipulation tactics, and show you exactly how pseudo-intellectuals try to fool audiences with fancy words and victim mentality.
The situation is that I think that Sean and I probably agree almost completely on everything until 1972. Then you have the first really serious situation where a mysterious term is not only introduced into our common vocabulary called quantum gravity, but it takes over as a fictitious history that the central problem of theoretical physics is the quantization of gravity, which is not true historically, and you can check it on Google Ngrams. So this is just a fiction. The progress in the object that tracks our progress in physics, called the Lagrangian or the action, stops moving in 1973. And there's a bunch of wiggle words that I don't think we have time for between fundamental physics and regular physics.
Oh, here we go with Eric's greatest hits. He's throwing around technical terms like Lagrangian and action to sound smart, but this is complete nonsense wrapped in fancy mathematics vocabulary. The Lagrangian formalism didn't just stop moving in 1973. That's like saying calculus stopped being useful after Newton died, or that cooking stopped advancing after someone invented the oven. What actually happened is that physics kept advancing with groundbreaking developments in the Standard Model, quantum field theory, quantum chromodynamics, electroweak theory, and yes, string theory. Eric is essentially claiming that all of modern physics after 1973 is fake because it doesn't fit his personal timeline of when he thinks physics should have progressed. This is the kind of statement that makes actual physicists roll their eyes. It's like a failed musician claiming that all music after 1975 is garbage because that's when he stopped understanding it. The arrogance is breathtaking. He's essentially dismissing decades of Nobel Prize-winning work because it doesn't align with his personal grievances about the field.
I would say I am the only person in Generation X to have actually been present in the room when everything shifted towards string theory, which happened in 1983 at the University of Pennsylvania, when a fellow named Edward Witten gave the first lecture that I think he ever did publicly on string theory.
This is peak Eric Weinstein, positioning himself as the sole witness to some mythical turning point in physics history. I am the only person in Generation X, really? The only one? Out of millions of people born in that generation, Eric alone witnessed this earth-shattering moment? This is like claiming you are the only person who saw the Beatles perform because you were at one concert. The string theory revolution didn't happen because Edward Witten gave one magical lecture that hypnotized the entire physics community. It happened because the mathematics worked, it solved specific problems, and it provided a framework that other theories couldn't match. But Eric wants us to believe that thousands of brilliant physicists across the world all got fooled by one charismatic lecture, while he alone saw through the deception. It's the ultimate conspiracy theory for intellectuals. I was there when physics went wrong, and only I remember the truth. This kind of grandiose self-positioning is exactly what you'd expect from someone who thinks he's discovered the theory of everything but can't get it published in a real journal.
Like, I would happily cede to Sean all sorts of things, like the string theorists are by far the smarter group of all people trying to go beyond the Standard Model and general relativity. I would further cede that if the task is to quantize gravity directly, the string theorists and the string theory program have been more successful. But what you just saw is an example of what is actually going catastrophically wrong in the field, that a dominant narrative that has been perseverated into an as-if reality has created two teams, a smart team that gets it and a dumb team that just doesn't.
Eric's playing the victim card here with masterful precision. He's creating a false dichotomy where anyone who doesn't accept his theories is part of some corrupt, smart team establishment, while he's the brave outsider fighting for truth. This is classic crank behavior. When your ideas get rejected, don't examine whether they might actually be wrong, just claim the entire field is corrupt. It's the same playbook used by flat earthers and perpetual motion inventors. The reality is that physics isn't divided into smart and dumb teams. It's divided into people who do rigorous work that passes peer review and people who don't. Eric wants us to believe that every physicist who doesn't take his geometric unity seriously is part of some grand conspiracy, rather than accepting the simpler explanation that maybe his work just isn't as revolutionary as he thinks it is. This persecution complex is particularly rich coming from someone who's had every opportunity to engage with the physics community but instead chooses to promote his theories on podcasts and YouTube videos.
You said before I listened to your theory, you should listen to my Sean Carroll's theory. My theory is known as the standard model. I can give you an explanation for why SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, why there are 3 generations, why 16 particles in a generation, why the observed quantum numbers are the way they are, why the Higgs sector comes out of seemingly nowhere with a quartic potential with a quadratic term.
This is where Eric really shows his hand. He's making grandiose claims about solving fundamental mysteries of physics, why there are 3 generations of particles, why the quantum numbers are what they are, why the Higgs field works the way it does. These are some of the deepest questions in physics, and Eric is claiming he can explain them all with his geometric unity theory. But here's the thing, if you actually had explanations for these fundamental questions, you wouldn't be arguing about it on a talk show. You'd be collecting Nobel Prizes and revolutionizing our understanding of the universe. The fact that Eric has to resort to listing these claims instead of showing actual calculations, predictions, or experimental confirmations tells you everything you need to know. It's like someone claiming they can cure cancer, but instead of publishing their research, they're doing YouTube videos about how the medical establishment is suppressing their breakthrough. Any undergraduate physics student can make bold claims about solving the mysteries of the universe. What separates real physicists from cranks is the ability to back up those claims with mathematics, predictions, and experimental evidence.
And by the way, every time I talk about talking about this, somebody is telling me don't talk about the fact that you're actually in a physics department. And what I'm trying to tell you is I give talks in physics departments, I hang out with physics colleagues, I'm welcomed at places like the Institute for Advanced Study, MIT, etc., etc.
This is Eric's attempt to establish credibility by name-dropping prestigious institutions. But notice what he's not saying. He's not saying he has a faculty position at these places, he's not saying his work is being taken seriously by the researchers there, and he's not saying his papers are being published in their journals. Being welcomed at a place and being considered a serious contributor are 2 very different things. Lots of people give talks at universities. It doesn't mean their theories are accepted or even taken seriously. Universities invite all kinds of speakers, from legitimate researchers to controversial figures, because academic discourse benefits from diverse perspectives. But Eric is trying to leverage these speaking engagements as evidence that his theories have merit, when in reality they might just be inviting him because he's a controversial figure who draws audiences. It's the difference between being invited to speak at Harvard because you're a respected scholar versus being invited because you're a fascinating train wreck that students want to see in person.
The good news is I have read Eric's paper. Here it is. I actually have it here, right here. And it's worse than you would think. You know, it just very quickly, it starts off by saying the author is not a physicist and is no longer an active academician, but is an entertainer and host of a podcast. This work of entertainment is a draft work in progress, and it may not be built upon. So we're not allowed to think about Eric's theory and write a follow-up paper about it.
You're very much allowed, Sean.
To everything that is normally done in scientific discourse. You hope that people build upon your theories. You don't try to prevent them. And later on, it says,
Sean,
this document is an attempt to begin recovering. I'm going to read this. This document is an attempt to begin recovering a rather more complete theory, which at this point is only partially remembered and stitched together from old computer files, notebooks, recordings, and the like, dating back to as far as 1983. And this is why this paper is not going to appear in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not serious. It's not dog ate my homework kind of thing. if you have a dark matter thing,
Sean.
if you have a dark matter prediction, if you have a dark energy prediction, I want to see a plot in the paper. I want to see redshift versus
Sean,
distance. I want to see a calculation of a relic abundance so I can figure out how much dark matter is supposed to be. If you do that,
Sean,
people will pay attention to the theory. It's very possible.
Sean, first of all, how dare you? Second of all, if you're going to go by the standards of the no, Sean, how dare you cast shade and aspersions of the kind that I wouldn't seek to cast on you, but I will now.
And here we see Eric's true colors when faced with legitimate criticism. Sean Carroll just pointed out factual problems with Eric's paper, that it's labeled as entertainment, that it's incomplete, that it lacks the mathematical rigor expected in physics. These are objective observations about the document itself, not personal attacks. But Eric immediately goes nuclear with, "How dare you," and launches into a vicious personal attack on Sean's career. This is textbook behavior of someone who can't defend their work on its merits. When a real scientist faces criticism, they address the technical points, provide clarifications, or acknowledge limitations. They don't throw tantrums and start attacking the critic's tenure record. Eric's response here is so disproportionate and unprofessional that it completely undermines any credibility he might have had. He's essentially admitting that he can't defend his work intellectually, so he's resorting to character assassination. This is the kind of behavior you'd expect from a YouTube comment section, not from someone claiming to have revolutionized physics.
Okay.
I'm not seeking your favor, nor do I need to seek your approval. As you know, you failed to gain tenure at the University of Chicago. You're not highly regarded in the field. And again, I'm only returning the shade in which you just yourself cast. I wouldn't have done this otherwise. You then spent time as a non-tenured faculty at Caltech, and you only gained tenure in a non-standard professorship. You're not a leading person in the field. My belief structure about this is that you imagine that I'm coming to you saying, "Oh, Sean Carroll, tell me which graph I should do so that I can please you."
This is where Eric's narcissism really shines through. He's so offended by Sean's criticism that he's attacking Sean's professional standing, completely missing the irony that Sean actually has a successful career in physics while Eric has been relegated to podcasting and YouTube. But the real reveal is in that last sentence. Eric thinks Sean's feedback is about personal approval rather than scientific standards. This shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how science works. When physicists critique each other's work, they're not asking for personal validation, they're testing ideas against established standards of evidence and mathematical rigor. Eric's response shows he views scientific criticism as a personal attack on his ego rather than a necessary part of the scientific process. He's essentially saying, "I don't need your approval," when what Sean is actually saying is, "Your work doesn't meet basic scientific standards." It's like a failed chef responding to food critics by saying, "I don't need your approval of my cooking," while serving raw chicken. The criticism isn't about approval, it's about safety and quality standards.
As you know, because you've read the paper, what you said about Lagrangians is false. What you said about predictions is false. My concern is what you did is that you seized upon something where people have built on my ideas since 1994. The equations that Natty Seiberg and Ed Witten introduced that took over the world were called the insufficiently nonlinear equations when I was at Harvard in 1987 and introduced them. The question is why appear as an entertainer rather than as a physicist? First of all, neither you nor I are trained as physicists, Sean. You're actually trained as an astronomer. What you have in this situation is that you and I are both interloping in a field that is not the one to which we trained. That doesn't bother me about what you're doing. I've enjoyed some of your papers. I've thought very poorly of others. You have a wide range of interests. I think you're very creative. Your intellectually insulting aspect reminds me of you as the Marie Antoinette of theoretical physics influencers. I'm not here to please you. You know that there are tables in the document that you're reading that have plenty of predictions. You know that it solves plenty of problems. What you are doing is creating an environment of fear where every university worries, what does it mean to talk to this person? And what I would say to you is you are commenting on the effect that you are in fact inducing. You and a small cadre of people are like intellectual border collies of the physical sciences, casting shade and aspersions on those who are succeeding where the quantum gravity, string theoretic, and M-theoretic programs are failing.
This metaphor is absolutely hilarious and reveals so much about Eric's mindset. He's calling legitimate physicists intellectual border collies for doing their job, which is to maintain scientific standards and critically evaluate new theories. Border collies herd sheep, so Eric is essentially saying that physicists like Sean are trying to control and suppress independent thinkers like himself. But the comparison backfires spectacularly because border collies are actually highly intelligent, hardworking animals that serve an important purpose. Meanwhile, Eric is positioning himself as the independent sheep who's too smart to be herded. The irony is that in science, being a good border collie, someone who maintains standards and catches errors, is actually a valuable service to the field. Eric's resentment toward this quality control process shows he fundamentally misunderstands how science progresses. He wants the recognition and prestige that comes with scientific discovery, but he doesn't want to submit to the rigorous peer review process that validates those discoveries. It's like wanting to be a professional athlete but complaining about referees and drug testing.
Sean?
Look, I mean, I didn't say anything about Eric as a person, his history, or anything like that. I said things about the paper. Everything he says about me is like 90% true, as many things he says. The paper is not giving us any reason to think that this approach is promising. There is no quantum mechanics in the paper. There's no attempt at showing that this solves any of the known problems of quantum gravity. Again, it's not just about Eric, it's about anyone. If you want to make an impact on the physics research community, you have to give them a reason to think that what you do is promising.
Sean, you have a serious problem with dark energy that you're developing, and it's going to go right through being a problem with lambda CDM to eventually being a problem with the Einstein field equations themselves, perched as they are atop the space of metrics as a completely inadequate space of field content. What you've just said and what the aspersion that you have just cast, you are simply not qualified to say. What you have said is that I have given no reason. Let me imagine that paper, which was a draft rushed to get to an April 1st date, remains in a world where Sam Altman and Elon Musk continue to compete for better and better AIs. What would you say if at some point those AIs then got to that paper and said, holy cow, that is exactly what we've been missing. This thing solves all sorts of problems.
This is Eric's ultimate fantasy, that artificial intelligence will vindicate his theories because AI won't be biased by the corrupt physics establishment. It's a fascinating glimpse into his delusions of grandeur. He's essentially saying that his work is so advanced that only superhuman intelligence will be able to recognize its brilliance. This is the same argument used by every crank in history: future generations will understand my genius. The problem is that AI systems are trained on existing physics literature and mathematical principles, so if anything, they'd be even more likely to spot the flaws in Eric's work. His hope that AI will validate his theories reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of how both AI and physics work. It's not that physicists are too stupid or too biased to understand his work, it's that his work doesn't meet the established standards of evidence and mathematical rigor that define the field. No amount of artificial intelligence can turn incomplete mathematics into a theory of everything. It's like hoping that a more advanced calculator will make your wrong arithmetic suddenly become correct.
And the problem that we have is that a group of influencers with a penchant for being, and this is becoming one of my least favorite words, although I didn't have any negative association until recently, debunkers. The problem, Sean, is that you and I are naturally allied on almost everything. We're not very far apart. I don't disagree with the Standard Model. I think the Standard Model is the most beautiful piece of differential geometry before it becomes theoretical physics. But one of the things that you just said is that it's a classical field theory that is not quantized. As you well know, there was a revolution in the 1970s which said that we blew Hamiltonian analysis and that in fact every phase space carrying a symplectic form can be treated locally as if that symplectic form is the curvature of a line bundle, and the L2 sections of that line bundle form a Hilbert space, and the P and Q coordinate functions can be promoted to operators. It said that wine is what you get when you stop grape juice from becoming vinegar. And in fact, Hamiltonian analysis is what happens when you take a physical problem and you stop it from quantizing itself. That was one of the great errors of our time, that Hamiltonian analysis was actually pointing the way to saying that most classical problems contain the seeds of their own quantization. You know all this stuff, and I know this stuff. We know the same people. We probably can work in the same notation. My guess is that if you and I got over whatever this bizarre tension is between us and buried the hatchet, my guess is that after 2 days you'd say, boy, I really just didn't understand what he was saying.
This is Eric's final gambit, suggesting that if Sean just spent more time with him, he'd realize Eric was right all along. It's the classic, if you really understood my work, you'd agree with me argument. But notice how Eric frames this as a personal relationship issue rather than a scientific disagreement. He keeps referring to bizarre tension and wanting to bury the hatchet as if this is some kind of friendship problem rather than a fundamental disagreement about scientific standards. The subtext is clear. Eric believes that Sean's criticism stems from personal animosity rather than genuine scientific concerns. This completely misses the point that Sean is evaluating Eric's work based on established scientific criteria, not personal feelings. It's like a student who failed a math test telling the teacher, if you just spent more time with me, you'd realize my answers were actually correct. The problem isn't lack of understanding, it's lack of evidence and rigor. Eric's confidence that Sean would change his mind after 2 days of conversation reveals his belief that charm and personality can overcome scientific shortcomings.
And by the way, I would point out that I quite agree with Sean that philosophy, when done well, is an essential complement to understanding physics, lest we be tempted into the wrong kinds of thinking. What I would say a theory of everything is a theory that starts from minimal assumptions, recovers all of the rules, and demotivates the further scientific study of the initial set of data used to construct the model. Not that the initial set of data is uninteresting, but that it be interesting to theologians and philosophers rather than be motivating to mathematicians and physicists. And what I would say is, if it's true, imagine we were on the branch where geometric unity has proven itself, and the good Dr. Carroll agrees. What I would say is, at that point, why there are 4 degrees of freedom is not a scientific question. I don't think anybody that I know would be motivated to try to figure out how to get 4 degrees of freedom from nothing. That would be an interesting question, and that is the question upon which your God hinges. But I would say that in the case of a scientific atheist, what we're trying to do is to come up with a complete set of the rules of chess, as it were, for the physical universe from minimal inputs, and those minimal inputs should have so little structure that they are demotivating to everybody who studies partial differential equations or group representations.
What we've witnessed here is a masterclass in intellectual fraud and the psychology of the failed genius. Eric Weinstein represents a particularly modern type of charlatan, someone who has enough mathematical vocabulary to sound impressive to lay people but lacks the substance to fool actual experts. The most revealing aspect of this entire exchange is how Eric responds to legitimate criticism. When Sean Carroll points out objective flaws in his work, that it's labeled as entertainment, lacks mathematical rigor, and doesn't solve known problems, Eric doesn't address these points. Instead, he launches into personal attacks, conspiracy theories, and grandiose claims about his own importance. This is textbook behavior of someone who can't defend their work on its merits. Eric's entire persona is built around being the misunderstood genius who's too advanced for the establishment to understand. He positions himself as the sole witness to physics going wrong, the only person who remembers the truth, the brave outsider fighting corruption. This is catnip for people who want to feel intellectually superior without doing the hard work of actually understanding science. The geometric unity theory itself is a perfect example of pseudo-scientific sophistication. It's complex enough that most people can't evaluate it, uses enough technical jargon to sound legitimate, and makes grandiose claims about solving fundamental problems. But when actual physicists examine it, they find it lacks the mathematical rigor, experimental predictions, and problem-solving capability that define real scientific theories. What makes Eric particularly dangerous is that he's not obviously crazy like some cranks. He's articulate, well-connected, and has enough mathematical background to create convincing-sounding arguments. This makes him appealing to people who want to believe they're getting insider knowledge that the establishment doesn't want them to have. The tragedy is that Eric has wasted genuine talent on this quixotic quest for recognition. Instead of contributing to physics in a meaningful way, he spent decades building an elaborate mythology around his own supposed genius. He's become the physics equivalent of a middle-aged man still bragging about his high school football career, living in the past and resentful that the world hasn't recognized his greatness. Sean Carroll's patience throughout this exchange is remarkable. He's dealing with someone who's attacking his professional record, questioning his qualifications, and accusing him of being part of a corrupt conspiracy, yet he maintains focus on the actual scientific issues. This is what real scientific discourse looks like, focusing on evidence, methodology, and results rather than personal grievances and conspiracy theories. The bottom line is that Eric Weinstein represents everything wrong with modern intellectual discourse. He's convinced people that passion and confidence can substitute for rigor and evidence. He's turned scientific disagreement into personal drama. And he's wasted everyone's time with theories that don't work while attacking the people actually advancing human knowledge. Physics will continue to progress without Eric Weinstein's geometric unity, just as it has for the past 40 years while he's been working on it. The real tragedy isn't that the establishment rejected his genius, it's that he convinced himself he was a genius in the first place.